Humanity needs to be saved from everything that mars, wounds, or obstructs. Can it be saved? Can it be saved from all of the miserable wretchedness? Can it be saved now? The answer in Christianity is yes. God says, quote, "My grace is sufficient for thee," unquote. Quote, "Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ," unquote. What is it we need to be saved from? And can we be saved from it? False theology would tell you that it is sin we need to be saved from. Sin is not the initiative of man's disaster. It is the phenomenon, pure and simple. Something is its cause. So man must be saved from something that is anterior to sin. What is it? Fear. Fear is the chief torment and foe of this race. It induces nearly every bit of sin. I speak of fear in the broad sense. Fear means anxiety, worry, trepidation, alarm, the opposite of confidence and reliance or self-containment. It is the opposite of what means rule and dominion, courage and capacity. And sin is the resultant, almost invariably, of fear. For example, do you think anybody would ever sin if he could get what he wanted without it? Think you that anybody would be so discomforted and so uncomfortable as to sin if he were able to find supreme enjoyment and satisfaction and variety of experience without it? The reason that everybody is afraid is that they have been educated to be afraid. Religion has educated us to be afraid of the Almighty. We are afraid of God, afraid of heaven, afraid to go to heaven. There are people here listening to this video that are saying, "I'm not afraid to go to heaven." But suppose all the people here were invited to die tonight and to go to heaven. What would they do? They would all run for the hills. Not one would accept the invitation. And it is to the glory of God and to the glory of the people listening to this video that they reject the proposition that our infinitely good God needs to prostrate them with disease and crush life out of them in order to introduce them to the felicities of heaven. What is the matter with this race that makes every last man and woman a coward? Go to the philosopher or the scientist, and he will tell you that fear is the natural concomitant of existence, a very solitary feature, that it acts as a warning, breeds caution, etc. And it is literally instilled into the thoughts of men that fear is an essential to be expected and respected. The first thing this race must do in order to be saved is to learn that fear is ungodlike, unnatural, absolutely without divine ordination, a gratuitous, fabulous abomination without one solitary thread of reason or rationality, of excuse or propriety or tenure, that it is without any basis in truth or science, in law or in intelligence. In order to be saved, we must rationally understand from where comes fear, and we shall learn that we have come to be victims through ignorance and superstition. Through ignorance, first, of what lies at the very bottom of existence, what there is by way of nature, provision, ordination, and routine. Through ignorance of the foundation and basis upon which all things rest, and according to which all things must pursue their way. In other words, what is the science of creation, of life, of man's destiny? What was he created for? How much dominion over all the earth is he entitled to, and may he set forth and exhibit? In order to be saved from fear, we must come into the possession of that which will cast it out. Dominion will cast it out. In other words, the conscious sense of power on your part, sense of power that will cast out an equivalent of fear and consequently of fear's havoc. Why is it that instead of existing as able to do the things that Christ Jesus did, showing forth the mind that is equal to the moving of mountains, to all intents and purposes, there is a cringing, creeping, frightened world? It is because we have been educated to believe that our God is against us. Because we have been taught to believe that for some unsearchable reason, and it is always apologized for in these words, unsearchable indeed, infinite wisdom has seen fit to make somebody and to arrange for his tragedy and death. So at the outset, we start with the supposition that we were born to die, that we were born under the rule and law and provision of pain, sickness, insufficiency, and sin. And so, with that start, there is no other ultimate than sorrow and suffering. What must we do to be saved from fear? We must learn and can learn now that all that means God, all that means source, origin, foundation, and power, all that means creative force, all that is entitled to exercise any influence, to sustain the universe, to hold it in its grasp, that all of it is good, infinitely good, surpassing all possibility of human comprehension. We must learn that in spite of the appearance, the foundation of being is good. Our God hath done all things well. Be not afraid of God. The Christian is learning that God is his dearest friend. No babe ever nestled its head on the breast of more loving mother. None ever had a mother more intent upon the goodness of her child. None ever had a father so bound up in the protection and guidance and maintenance of his child. So we are to learn just as fast as we will that God means life and health and welfare and prosperity for all. Salvation means transformation of mind. You have no contention against some mighty enemy. You do not have to wrestle and to be tossed about by something that is powerful, that is natural or ordained. You have to contend against something that will flee just as you oppose it, and to the extent that you oppose it. In order to be saved from fear, we are to learn that everything that induces it can be mastered, can be controlled, set aside, exterminated, and annulled. What will do this? That which will induce us first to know that we have a right to overcome it, and then will induce us to try to exercise the right. The great service of the Christian to humanity today is that it is redeeming mankind and setting forth man's dominion over all evil and exhibiting the rule whereby it may be accomplished, whereby we may work out our salvation and accomplish for ourselves the sufficiency of deliverance. Why are we afraid? It is because we have a sort of idea that there is a God that has been watching us all the time and has seen every funny little thing that we have done and all the rest of the things, that He has them all marked down, and in the background is retribution, vengeance, punishment, more or less damnation, and sometimes hell. In other words, we are educated to believe that God is an executioner and that He Himself is going to settle the account with us to the extent of our everlasting agony. Every bit of that sort of thing is untrue. There is no God involved in it. It isn't the business of God. Now, what is it that punishes a mortal? It is sin itself. It is error itself. God doesn't punish anybody. He doesn't have to. Sin invariably brings its own sense of punishment, its own suffering, its own hell, and its own evil. There isn't any God in it at all. And when we come to understand this, it will be a relief because we will then have a right to view man not as an original sinner, but as a victim. Remorse never got anybody into heaven. A sense of regret and all that sort of thing is not the process. The process is reform. It is change. It is correction. The man who is today under the evil sense of being does not need to be whipped or scourged or punished. He needs to be educated. How about the sinner? There is no merit in suffering. The only merit there is in transformation. I have found people carrying along their agony because they thought it was entirely proper to be everlastingly berating and condemning themselves. You will never get to heaven that way. When we find that God is not responsible for evil, that it is no scientific or natural basis, that at least it is nothing but a fraudulent, perverted sense of being, when we find that there has been manifested to humanity an absolute adequate way whereby to overcome the whole thing, that way having been demonstrated through Jesus Christ, then when we begin to learn that man has a right to stand up and overcome, what does such a man as that do? Now we get to the point as to what a Christian does in order to overcome. He resists. And one thing that he begins to resist is fear. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. In every instance of disease, there is latent or immediate fear, and it is the business of the practitioner to reach and cancel that fear. And just to the extent that he does it, does his case begin to improve. Let me say to some of you who perhaps are patients that you don't need to be afraid. What you need to do is to take God at His word. Quote, be not afraid, unquote, because you don't have to be afraid. To keep fear at arm's length. To keep fear at arm's length. Never admit that it is yours, because if it is yours, you better keep it. Never admit that it has a right to continue in business at the old stand. As soon as possible, you want to put out an advertisement mentally that this place has changed hands. Resist fear upon the ground that it has no right to be, and that it does not help the situation at any rate. Think for a moment of the mighty transactions that occurred when Jesus came on earth and entreated humanity to be not afraid. He could not tell them why because they would not understand it. He simply said, be not afraid, fear not. You have been listening to an article written by a Christian scientist by the name of Edward Kimball. Mr. Kimball delivered this talk at Third Church of Christ Scientists, Chicago. It was published in part in the Chicago Evening Post, November the 15th, 1907.